Your vision will become clear, Carl Jung once wrote, only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. These words were not written in comfort. They were written at the edge of a psychological abyss. At the height of his career, Jung was one of the most respected psychiatrists in Europe, successful, admired, and standing beside the towering figure of Sigmund Freud himself. And then, he walked away. Not toward fame, not toward safety, but inward, into silence, visions, and something most people spend their lives running from: the dark unknown of the human soul. For nearly 4 years, Carl Jung willingly descended into what looked like madness. He spoke with invisible figures. He recorded their voices. He painted their symbols. Night after night, he faced images of chaos, death, gods, monsters, and forgotten memories that seemed to rise from beneath the mind itself. His colleagues whispered that he had lost his sanity. His reputation trembled. His future stood on the brink of ruin. Yet Jung kept going. He believed that what terrified him was not insanity. It was truth. And when he finally returned from that inner underworld, he carried something no textbook had ever held before: a map of the psyche. A map that helps explain why we sabotage what we love, why dreams repeat, why we are drawn to what can break us, and why darkness is not always the enemy, but often the doorway. Tonight, in this bedtime journey, we follow Carl Jung through the quiet towns of Switzerland, through the collapse of his old identity, and into the hidden architecture of the human mind. By the end, you may find that his descent was not just his own, but a mirror of your deepest questions. And if stories like this help you unwind, reflect, or drift toward sleep, you're warmly invited to subscribe so you'll never miss the next journey into history and the human soul. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1. The Swiss Soil. Carl Gustav Jung was born on July 26, 1875, into the quiet heart of Switzerland, a country whose spirit would shape not only his character, but the very architecture of his mind. To understand Jung, one must first understand the land that formed him. Switzerland was once described as a national park of the spirit, a place where the mountains taught patience, where citizens voted directly on their own future, and where responsibility lived not in crowds, but in the individual soul. For more than 400 years, the nation had turned inward rather than outward, choosing internal debate over foreign wars. The Swiss did not look to neighboring lands for evil. They searched for it within themselves. This inward gaze, this quiet habit of self-confrontation, would one day become the very foundation of Jung's psychology. He would later give it a name: the shadow. Jung was fiercely Swiss. Even as his inner world grew stranger and more vast, he remained anchored to structure and duty. He served enthusiastically in the Swiss army, which he would later call the stabilizing force that kept him grounded during his most disorienting inner descents. The practical nature of Swiss life, its clocks, its discipline, its stone certainty, kept him from being swept away by the oceans of his own unconscious. His childhood unfolded first in the quiet riverside town of Kesswil, and later near Kleinhüningen, close to Basel. Roman ruins softened into the banks of the Rhine. vineyards slept beneath wide summer skies. It was a peaceful world on the surface, but beneath that calm, something ancient was stirring. Between the ages of 3 and 4, Jung had a dream that would haunt and guide him for the rest of his life. In the dream, he descended stone steps into the earth, moving deeper and deeper underground. At the bottom, in a shadowed chamber, he encountered a giant, flesh-colored figure seated on a golden throne. From above, his mother's voice spoke a single, terrifying word: the man-eater. This dream, Jung later said, initiated him into the secrets of the earth. It was the true beginning of his intellectual life, his first encounter with the primal forces beneath the surface of reason. By the age of 11, Jung felt divided within himself. There was personality number 1, the ordinary schoolboy who struggled with mathematics and disappointed his teachers. And then there was personality number 2, a strange, timeless presence who seemed older than history itself, as if he had lived once in the 18th century. Jung would later understand this not as illness, but as his first intuition of the relationship between the conscious ego and something larger, older, and eternal within. Around this same time, another vision took hold. On a bright day near Basel Cathedral, Jung fought desperately against a thought that tried to force its way into his mind. For days he resisted. Finally, exhausted, he surrendered. In his vision, he saw God seated above the cathedral on a throne. And then, impossibly, God dropped a massive piece of filth upon his own church, shattering it completely. Instead of terror, Jung felt bliss. In that moment, he understood something that would never leave him: that the divine was not bound by human tradition, that creation and destruction were not enemies, but two faces of the same mystery. These experiences made him profoundly alone. He could not speak of them to his father, a pastor who preached without conviction. He could not tell his mother, who drifted at times into her own distant, otherworldly states. He could not share them with schoolmates who lived in an entirely different universe. This isolation became both his wound and his gift. It forced him inward, into an inner life of extraordinary depth. The Swiss soil had produced something unusual in Carl Jung, a boy who thought in images rather than words, who felt the divine as something wild and contradictory, who sensed ancient forces flowing beneath the orderly surface of daily life. This quiet foundation, rooted in mountains, ruins, dreams, and shadows, would support everything that came later. His break with Freud, his descent into the unconscious, and his discovery of the deep patterns that shape the human soul. And all of it began here, in the stillness of Switzerland. Chapter 2: The Boy with Two Souls. As Carl Jung grew older, the split within him did not heal. It widened. There was still personality number 1, the boy who went to school each morning, tried to behave, tried to belong. He struggled with mathematics. He disappointed his teachers. He got into fights. To the world, he looked ordinary, perhaps even destined for an unremarkable life. But personality number 2 lived somewhere else entirely. This second presence felt ancient, older than classrooms, older than textbooks, older than the narrow corridors of childhood. It knew things without learning them. It felt kinship with stones, rivers, mountains, and centuries long forgotten. It listened not to teachers, but to something wordless and eternal, moving beneath the surface of the world. School became a quiet torment, not because Jung lacked intelligence, but because he could not reconcile these two realities. The outer world demanded proofs, rules, obedience. The inner world spoke in images, symbols, and unspoken knowing. One day, during a geometry lesson, his teacher accused him of cheating on an exam. Jung had not cheated, but he could not prove his innocence. The accusation burned into him. More than humiliation, it felt like a verdict on reality itself. The outer world of rules and logic had no understanding of the deeper truth that lived inside him. Then, at the age of 12, something shifted. A classmate shoved him during recess. Jung fell and struck his head against the pavement. As he lay there, a strange thought passed calmly through his mind. Now you won't have to go to school anymore. Soon after, the fainting began. Whenever school approached, his body would collapse. For 6 months, the spells continued. Doctors examined him and found nothing wrong. His parents grew desperate. One evening, Jung overheard his father speaking to a friend in quiet fear. If the boy proved incurable, he said, he had no money to support him. The words fell on Jung like ice water. That night, he walked into his father's study, opened a Latin grammar, and began to read. Almost immediately, the familiar dizziness rose. His body begged him to fall, but for the first time, he resisted. Minute by minute, he fought the tide of unconsciousness with sheer will. After an hour, the faintness receded. It never returned. This was Jung's first conscious victory over his own psyche, his first realization that the mind could create illness, and through will could also dissolve it. Yet the terrible secret remained. The vision of God destroying his own cathedral still lived inside him like forbidden fire. Jung searched through his father's theological books for answers, but found only formulas without life. His father, a pastor, preached weekly about love, grace, and faith, yet Jung saw the doubt behind his eyes. Paul Jung no longer truly believed the sermons his lips recited. When confirmation classes arrived, Jung hoped desperately for revelation. He longed for someone to explain the mystery of communion, of God entering bread and blood. But the ritual came and passed in silence. When he swallowed the wafer at his first communion, he felt nothing. Around him, other boys looked transformed. Jung remained unchanged. This is all dead, he thought. And in that moment, the church failed him completely. And so he turned inward, more deeply than ever before. He began to read without rest: Goethe, Faust, Schopenhauer, Kant. In these books, he discovered something astonishing. Others, long before him, had felt this same division, this fracture between outer conformity and inner truth. He was not insane. He was simply seeing what most refused to see. The world, Jung realized, lived on two levels. Most people moved only along the surface, but beneath, in the depths, forces were at work that schools and churches never named. Forces strong enough to shatter cathedrals, heal fainting bodies, and speak through dreams of underground chambers. And the boy with two souls was learning, slowly, how to listen to both. Chapter 3. Where Science Met the Invisible. In the autumn of 1895, at just 19 years old, Carl Jung entered the gates of Basel University. He was still uncertain of his path. Medicine had been chosen not from passion, but necessity. His family had no money for dreams that did not promise bread. Practicality ruled. And yet beneath that practical choice, a deeper current moved quietly through him. He wanted to understand the mysteries that had shaped his childhood. Why could the mind split in two? Why did God appear in dreams? Why could fainting spells be cured by will alone? Then, in 1896, death entered his life with final certainty. His father, Paul Jung, died after years of struggling with a faith he no longer truly held. With him went the last fragile stability of the household. The family was left with almost nothing. At only 20 years old, Jung became responsible for both his mother and sister. His uncle spoke to him without softness. "This," he said, "is how one learns to become a man." Jung worked wherever work could be found. He sold antiques on commission. He served as an assistant. When money thinned to almost nothing, he ate one meal a day and said nothing of hunger. And then, the impossible began to press its way into the ordinary. One evening, Jung sat studying with his mother in their dining room. Without warning, a sound like a pistol shot shattered the silence. Their heavy walnut table, 70 years old, had split clean across its center. No change in temperature, no tension in the wood. Just a perfect, impossible fracture through solid timber. 2 weeks later, another explosion. From inside the sideboard, a steel bread knife shattered into 4 pieces, though it had not been touched. The blade lay broken in a drawer, resting among perfectly undisturbed linens. These events did not make Jung a believer in spirits. They made him an investigator. Among his relatives were those who held séances, with a young cousin said to channel spirits. Jung attended not with candles or prayers, but with a notebook. The girl spoke in strange voices, claimed past lives, described unseen worlds. Much of it was clearly fantasy, but not all. Sometimes, knowledge appeared that she could not have learned. Sometimes her face changed in ways that no performance could fully explain. Meanwhile, medical school continued relentlessly. Surgery, internal medicine, pathology. Jung felt no calling in any of them. And as his final examinations approached, he still had not chosen a specialty. Then, on a quiet evening before his exams, he opened a psychiatric textbook by Kraft Ebing. In its opening pages, the author admitted that psychiatric texts reflected the subjective nature of their writers more than any other medical field. Psychiatry, it said, was the stepchild of medicine, working in darkness, misunderstood and disrespected. To Jung, it felt like lightning. Here, exactly here, was the place where natural science met the invisible world, where doctors wrestled with the same forces that had split his table and shattered his knife, where the human soul revealed itself not as theory, but as living mystery. His friends were alarmed. Psychiatry, they warned, was professional ruin. The asylums were dumping grounds. The patients were hopeless. Jung did not hesitate. In 1900, at 24 years old, he arrived at the gates of the Burg Hölzli Psychiatric Hospital in Zurich. He carried everything he owned in a single suitcase. Before him stood locked doors. Behind them waited the mad, the broken, the lost. Those who lived in the same divided world he had known since childhood. And as he stepped forward, quietly, without ceremony, Carl Jung crossed the threshold not into madness, but into his life's true work. He had not wandered into the asylum. He had come home. Chapter 4. The Hill Where the Unconscious Awoke. In December of 1900, Carl Jung arrived at the Burg Holzli Psychiatric Hospital, rising quietly on the slopes of Zurichberg Hill, overlooking the sleeping city of Zurich below. Snow lay thick across the grounds. The world seemed muffled, hushed, as if sound itself had been wrapped in white. The hospital was modern, progressive, unlike the grim asylums of the past. Under the direction of Eugen Bleuler, it had become one of the most advanced psychiatric institutions in Europe. Bleuler believed that patients were not simply to be restrained, but understood. This belief reached Jung immediately, like a quiet signal spoken only to him. And yet, when he first stepped inside, he felt overwhelmed. He would later write that he understood nothing at all. His medical training at Basel had not prepared him for what he encountered here. So Jung did something unusual. He moved into the hospital itself. For 6 months, he lived among the patients and staff. He read obsessively over 50 volumes of psychiatric research, devouring every case history he could find. He wanted to know what madness truly was, not as a diagnosis, but as a lived reality. And it was the patients who taught him most. There was Babette, an elderly woman who had spent decades inside the wards. Other doctors dismissed her speech as meaningless fragments, word salads of broken language. But Jung listened differently. When she claimed she was the Lorelei, or declared that Naples and she must supply the world with noodles, Jung heard symbols, not nonsense. Beneath the strange phrases, he sensed a mythic logic, an inner world speaking in images rather than rules. These were not random firings of a broken brain. They were messages from a psyche that had retreated into its own private mythology. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Working with Franz Ricklin, Jung refined the word association experiment. Instead of simply recording answers, they measured reaction time, emotional disturbance, hesitation. When Jung said the word mother, and a patient delayed 12 seconds before replying, kind, that pause meant something. A hidden emotional knot had been touched. Jung realized they were no longer guessing at the unconscious. They were measuring it. He tested the method on himself, on colleagues. Everyone, he found, had complexes, emotional clusters of unresolved memory and feeling. What separated the healthy from the ill was not the presence of complexes, but their power. In normal life, they caused hesitation. In neurosis, confusion. In psychosis, they became autonomous, forming independent voices and visions. And then, in 1904, came a patient who would mark Jung forever. Her name was Sabine Spielrein. She arrived screaming, resisting, brilliant and broken all at once. She was multilingual, intellectually gifted, and tormented by violent sexual and aggressive fantasies. Jung did not treat her from a distance. He entered her inner world with care and with risk. She improved dramatically. Later, she would become a psychoanalyst herself. But the intensity of their relationship taught Jung something dangerous. The psychiatrist could be drawn into the patient's madness, or discover his own waiting there. It was during this work that Jung encountered Sigmund Freud. When he read The Interpretation of Dreams, he felt, for the first time, that he was no longer alone. Freud confirmed what Jung was already sensing. The unconscious had its own logic, and dreams were not meaningless, but compensations for conscious life. In 1906, Jung sent Freud his research on word association. Freud replied with enthusiasm. A historic correspondence began. And yet, even then, a division quietly formed. Freud reduced psychic life to sexuality and childhood trauma. Jung saw something more. A schizophrenic patient whose visions matched ancient mythological liturgies he had never studied. How could personal biography alone explain such universal images? Jung began collecting these parallels. His patients were not just sick. They were drowning in the same symbolic waters that mystics, prophets, and visionaries had entered for thousands of years. Meanwhile, life outside the hospital deepened. Jung married Emma Rauschenbach in 1903, heiress to a great industrial fortune. For the first time, financial worry loosened its grip, but new tensions arose. Emma learned to accept days when her husband disappeared into his study, or announced that séances were being conducted in their home, or that patients would live with them for months. She studied mathematics, then Latin, then psychology, trying to follow him into his inner world. By 1905, Jung had become senior physician at Burghölzli. He ran his own wards. He introduced work therapy, giving patients responsibility instead of confinement alone. He saw paranoid patients improve when given meaningful purpose. The hospital itself became a healing organism. His reputation spread. American doctors traveled to Zurich to study the association method. Jung lectured. He published. But inside, unrest grew quietly. The medical model explained too little. Diagnosis and classification captured symptoms, but missed meaning. Each patient, Jung now believed, was living out a myth. Not merely a personal story, but one connected to something vast and ancient beneath individual life. And so, in 1909, after 9 transformative years, Jung resigned from Burghölzli. He had learned everything institutional psychiatry could teach him. Now the greater journey awaited, into territories no hospital walls could ever contain. Chapter 5: The Father and the Abyss. By 1908, the house at Küsnacht was rising from Carl Jung's own imagination. 3 stories of stone and timber on the quiet shore of Lake Zurich. Jung designed every room himself. It was a home built not only for family, but for thought. Consulting rooms, a growing library, space for patients who sometimes lived with them. Emma was pregnant with their 4th child. When they moved in during 1909, it marked the end of Jung's dependence on any institution. He had left the hospital behind. Now he was free. But freedom, as he would soon learn, always demands a price. That same year, Jung set sail for America with Sigmund Freud and Sandor Ferenczi. Clark University had invited them to speak, and the journey itself would last 7 weeks. Every day on the voyage, Jung and Freud analyzed each other's dreams. It was intimate, intense, almost ritualistic. Yet hairline fractures were already forming. Freud refused to share certain dreams. He said he could not risk his authority. Jung was stunned. This was not the open search for truth he had imagined. It felt instead like a father demanding obedience from a son. Then came Jung's dream. He found himself inside a house he somehow knew was his own. The upper floor was elegant, refined, decorated in Rococo style. Beautiful, but thin. When he descended the stairs, he entered a medieval ground floor with stone walls and heavy furniture. A thick door opened to stone steps leading downward. Below that, a Roman cellar with brick walls and dusty floors. And then, beneath even that, another opening. A ring set into the floor. When he pulled it, he descended into a cave cut from living rock. On the ground lay broken pottery, ancient bones, and two very old human skulls, half disintegrated. Freud pressed him for interpretation. What did the skulls represent? Jung knew what Freud expected: death wishes toward someone close. That was the rule of Freudian theory. And so, reluctantly, Jung offered his wife and sister-in-law as symbolic answers. Freud was satisfied, but Jung felt he had violated something sacred inside himself. The dream was not about hidden murder. It was a map of the psyche itself. Consciousness on the surface, the personal unconscious beneath, and below that, layers containing the history of all humanity, the collective unconscious. Back in Europe, Jung plunged into mythology. He read Greek legends, Germanic sagas, Egyptian mysteries. Everywhere he looked, the same patterns repeated: the hero, the great mother, the wise old man, the shadow. These figures appeared not only in ancient texts, but in the visions of psychotic patients who had never studied mythology. A factory worker drew mandalas identical to Tibetan designs he had never seen. In 1910, Jung was elected president of the International Psychoanalytic Association, a position Freud personally pushed him into, hoping his Gentile crown prince would give the movement respectability. But even at that same Congress, the crack became a fracture. Freud demanded absolute obedience to sexual theory. He called it their dogma, their fortress against mysticism. Jung felt physically ill. Science did not have dogmas. Religions did. In 1911, Jung began writing Symbols of Transformation. He analyzed the fantasies of a young American woman he had never met, showing how her visions mirrored ancient myths. Libido, he argued, was not merely sexual energy. It was psychic energy, capable of infinite transformation. Every page carried him farther from Freud. Emma begged him to stop. For months, Jung could not bring himself to write the final chapter. He knew exactly what this book would cost him: his colleagues, his reputation, his entire professional world. Then he forced himself to finish it. Better to lose everything than betray his own soul. The book was published in 1912. Freud's response was merciless. Jung was labeled a mystic, a traitor, mentally unstable. Their final meeting came at a conference in Munich in November 1912. They argued over the Egyptian pharaoh Amenhotep. Freud insisted the king's actions stemmed from hatred toward his father. Jung disagreed. It was religious, not personal. Freud grew agitated, and suddenly he collapsed, falling into a dead faint. Jung caught him, carried him to a couch. When Freud opened his eyes, he looked at Jung with open fury. By January 1913, Jung resigned his presidency. By April, their personal relationship was over. Jung was 37 years old, isolated, professionally broken, abandoned by the very movement he had helped to build. And then something far more terrifying began. Freud's structures were gone. The walls had fallen away, and from the depths of Jung's own unconscious, visions began to rise. Floods of blood covering Europe, cities of the dead, rivers of destruction sweeping across the world. He believed he was losing his mind. He did not yet know they were visions of the First World War, which would erupt in 1914. He only knew this: having lost the outer world, he was now falling inward, into the abyss of the soul. And the real journey was only just beginning. Chapter 6. The Descent That Did Not Destroy Him. The years after Freud were the most dangerous of Carl Jung's life. The outer structure that had once held him steady was gone. And without it, the ground beneath his inner world began to dissolve. Strange moods swept through him without warning. Pressure built inside his skull. His dreams filled with corpses, with flooded lands, with red-stained earth. He felt as though the world inside him was breaking open. In October of 1913, while traveling alone, the vision came. He saw a monstrous flood pouring across Europe. The waters rose higher and higher, swallowing cities, fields, roads, and people. Only the Alps rose above the deluge, protecting Switzerland like a last island of stone. Yellow waves carried floating bodies. Then the water turned to blood. 2 weeks later, the vision returned. This time, a voice spoke. "It will become real." Jung was terrified. He had seen this before in his patients at Berg Hölzli. The mythic images, the prophetic tone, the intrusive voices. These were the warning signs of psychosis. He seriously considered closing his practice. How could he guide others through the darkness when he himself seemed to be falling into it? Then August 1914 arrived. World War I erupted across Europe. The blood in his visions became real blood. Only then did Jung understand. What he had witnessed was not personal madness. It was a premonition rising from the collective unconscious, a psychic echo of catastrophe forming beneath the surface of history itself. And with that realization came a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would not resist the unconscious. He would descend into it, not as a victim, but as an explorer. On December 12, 1913, Jung sat at his desk and deliberately let go. He allowed the barriers of rational control to fall away. He drifted downward through inner darkness until at last his feet touched ground. He stood in a cave. Before him were 3 figures: an old man with a white beard, a beautiful young woman, and beside them, a vast black serpent. The old man called himself Elijah. The woman was Salome. From that night forward, Jung learned how to enter these inner realms consciously. He called the method active imagination. He was no longer passively dreaming. He questioned the figures. He argued with them. He demanded their meaning. They answered. One of them, Philemon, appeared as a winged old man, part human and part kingfisher. From him, Jung learned the most unsettling truth of all. Thoughts are not merely things you create. They are things that happen to you. Every evening, Jung returned to the inner world. He wrote everything in his journals. He painted the images, ancient symbols, geometric patterns, rituals of death and rebirth. Material poured from the depths faster than he could contain it. To survive, he had to remain anchored in ordinary life. He worked with his hands. He carved stone. He sailed his boat across Lake Zurich, and most of all, his family kept him rooted to the world of flesh and time. Each night, Emma watched her husband disappear into his study, where he spoke aloud to invisible presences. She could have had him committed. Many would have. Instead, she held the household together. She raised their 5 children, while Jung wrestled with forces that might have shattered him completely. The most humiliating command came from the unconscious itself. A voice told him to play. A grown man, a doctor, a scholar of rising international reputation, now kneeling at the lake's edge, building small stone villages like a child. Jung obeyed, and as the stones took shape, something ancient stirred. Childhood memories surfaced, forgotten dreams returned. The simple act of play reconnected him to the deepest creative current of the psyche, the layer that exists long before logic, before theory, before identity. This, Jung realized, was individuation, not the conquest of the primitive, but the integration of it. Not the escape from darkness, but the willingness to carry light and shadow together into wholeness. And still, the descent was not yet over. Chapter 7. The Tower Between Two Worlds. When the war finally ended in 1918, Carl Jung emerged from his long descent into the unconscious, a changed man. The visions did not vanish, but they no longer came like storms. Now they arrived like slow tides, asking not to overwhelm him, but to be shaped. Jung understood he could not keep these inner worlds locked in journals and paintings forever. They needed a body, a place in stone, a home in the outer world. And so, in 1923, he bought a small, remote piece of land at Bollingen on the upper reaches of Lake Zurich. It could be reached only by foot or by boat. No roads, no crowds, no clocks. There, Jung began to build with his own hands. The first tower was simple, a round stone structure. No electricity, no running water, food cooked over fire, water drawn straight from the lake. He laid every stone himself. Into the walls, he carved Latin inscriptions, symbols, and images born from his visions. This was not an escape from reality. It was a return to something far older than the modern world, something elemental and human. Here, Jung lived as what he called personality number 2, the timeless self, the man who existed outside history's noise. As the outer world rebuilt after the war, Jung's reputation spread beyond Switzerland. Students from England and America crossed the ocean to study with him. They were not searching for Freudian theories of drives and repression. They came for something wider, for a psychology that included soul, myth, and spirit. Among them were wealthy Americans who would fund Jung's growing work. Even Edith Rockefeller McCormick, daughter of John D. Rockefeller, moved to Zurich specifically to enter analysis with him. Long before this, in 1916, Jung had founded the Psychological Club of Zurich, not for group therapy, which he distrusted, but to give his patients something just as essential: community. He believed individual analysis could isolate the soul. People needed others who understood the strange terrain of the inner journey. The club became a rare meeting ground. Swiss townspeople, American heiresses, English intellectuals, all bound by their confrontation with the unconscious. Jung often warned them, "You cannot individuate on Mount Everest." True transformation, he said, did not happen in isolation. It happened in the tension between inner vision and ordinary life, marriage, work, conflict, responsibility. These were not obstacles to spiritual growth. They were its testing ground. Over the years,
The tower at Bollingen grew, just as Jung himself continued to change. A second tower rose in 1927, after his mother's death. A central hall was added in 1935. An upper story followed in 1945, after Emma's passing. Each addition marked a psychic turning point, made solid in stone. Those who visited the tower often felt unsettled. Time seemed to behave differently there.
Jung might spend weeks alone, cooking simple meals, carving rock, living in a rhythm unchanged since medieval Europe. Yet in the modern world, his practice in Küsnacht flourished. Patients arrived from across the globe. Jung accepted only those he believed were truly ready for inner work. His methods could be strange. Paint your dreams, dance your feelings, speak to your symptoms. When one woman complained of chronic stomach pain, Jung told her to let her stomach speak. What emerged was everything she had been forced to swallow inside her marriage. But Jung never pretended this work was safe. Not everyone who opened the door to the unconscious returned unbroken. Some patients were overwhelmed. A few ended in psychiatric hospitals. Jung acknowledged the danger without illusion. The unconscious held both creation and destruction. To touch one meant accepting the other. This was not self-improvement. This was transformation. And transformation, Jung knew, always demanded a death. The death of who you thought you were. And not everyone survived that death intact. Chapter 8. Where the World Still Dreamed. Providing 1925, Carl Jung felt that Europe was no longer enough. He had traveled deeply into the human soul, but always through the lens of Western civilization. Now he needed distance. He needed to see the European psyche from the outside, as one culture among many. So he went west. On a long train journey across America, Jung watched the landscape slowly shed its cities. Steel and stone gave way to dust and desert. The rhythm of the wheels seemed to carry him backward through time. To Jung, America felt like a civilization sprinting into the future without ever looking behind. He sensed that its people lived almost entirely in their heads, cut off from the deeper roots of the soul. In New Mexico, Jung arrived at Taos Pueblo. There he met Oebiano, known to the Americans as Mountain Lake. They sat together on the roof of his adobe home beneath the wide desert sky. For a long time, Mountain Lake simply studied Jung's face. Then he spoke. He said the white people were mad. Their eyes revealed it, always searching, always grasping, always wanting something more. They thought with their heads, he said. The Pueblo thought with their hearts. When Jung gently asked about their spiritual life, Mountain Lake hesitated. These were sacred things, secrets that outsiders had tried to erase for centuries. At last, he explained. Every morning, his people performed rituals to help their father, the sun, cross the sky. Without their prayers, the sun would not rise. Darkness would swallow the world. Jung sat in silence, stunned. Here was a people whose daily life carried cosmic responsibility. Their smallest rituals sustained the universe itself. Suddenly, he understood why the whites appeared mad to them. They moved through the world without any such meaning. They did not know that existence itself depended on their inner participation. That same year, Jung sailed south to East Africa. He wanted, as he said, to see consciousness at its dawn. The African plains opened endlessly before him, vast herds of zebras, antelopes, and gazelles flowing across the land like a single living organism. At times, Jung felt he had stepped millions of years into the past.
This was the world before human consciousness had broken itself away from nature. One morning at sunrise, standing on a hill and watching the animals move below, Jung received a revelation. The animals were complete in themselves. They needed no observer. They existed fully without reflection. But the world, he realized, only gained meaning through human awareness. Without consciousness, the universe existed, but it did not know that it existed. Through human eyes, the universe became conscious of itself. From Africa, Jung traveled north along the Nile to Egypt. Inside the tomb of Ramses, something uncanny occurred. A guide struck a match to illuminate the hieroglyphs. In that brief flare of light, Jung felt he saw the entire history of Egypt compressed into a single moment. The rise and fall of dynasties, the birth and death of gods. Time collapsed. In that instant, he understood how the Egyptian soul experienced eternity. The dead were not gone. They remained present, woven into the living moment. But Africa also revealed something darker. In Kenya, Jung watched his English companions begin to unravel. One withdrew into heavy drinking. Another grew suspicious and paranoid. The psychic atmosphere of the land was dissolving their European identities. They were losing the personas civilization had built around them. Jung saw the danger clearly. Colonialism, he realized, was not only political, it was psychological. The Europeans projected their unconscious onto the people they ruled. They then worshipped or feared those projections, idealizing or demonizing what they refused to recognize within themselves. By the time Jung returned to Europe, something in him had permanently shifted. He now understood that every culture organized the psyche differently. What healed a European might destroy an African. What made sense to an American might be meaningless to an Indian. The archetypes were universal, but their expressions were profoundly shaped by culture. A psychology that claimed absolute universality while ignoring these differences, Jung concluded, was simply another form of colonialism. And he had no intention of building his life's work on such blindness. Chapter 9. The Hidden Gold of the Soul. In 1926, Carl Jung returned to Europe, carrying a dream that would not release him. In the dream, he stood in Liverpool, a city he had never visited in waking life. Rain fell steadily from a dark sky. The streets lay quiet and wet, arranged like the spokes of a vast wheel. At the exact center of the city stood a single magnolia tree, in full and radiant bloom. It glowed with a soft, impossible light. No sun shone above it, yet its flowers opened toward an invisible source of illumination. Its roots reached deep into black earth, while its branches lifted toward unseen fire. When Jung awoke, he felt the dream vibrating with meaning. Later, he discovered that the name Liverpool could be translated as the pool of life, and suddenly the image revealed itself to him. This was not a city. It was the self, the hidden center of the human psyche, the point of inner totality. No matter how dark the outer world became, this inner center carried its own eternal light. The dream was a mandala, a sacred circle, a form Jung had been drawing for years without knowing its ancient meaning. Now he understood. Mandalas arise spontaneously when the psyche is moving toward wholeness. Then, in 1928, confirmation arrived from a distant culture and an ancient voice. Jung received a parcel from Richard Wilhelm, the great German sinologist. Inside was a translation of an old Chinese spiritual text, The Secret of the Golden Flower.
As Jung read, a deep shock moved through him. Here, written in thousand-year-old Taoist language, were the very same processes he had discovered in his own inner descent. The golden flower was consciousness itself. The circular movement was individuation, the return to the self. Ancient Chinese sages had mapped the same inner territory Jung had been exploring in solitude. For the first time, he no longer felt alone. The text also mentioned something unexpected: Western parallels in alchemy. Until then, Jung had dismissed alchemy as little more than primitive chemistry, superstition, failed science. Now he looked again. He found an old alchemical book and began to read. Slowly, something astonishing emerged. The alchemists were not trying to make physical gold. They were projecting psychological transformation onto matter. When they spoke of mercury turning into gold, they were describing the refinement of the soul. When they described death, decay, marriage, and rebirth in glass vessels, they were secretly recording the stages of inner transformation. Jung plunged into the study with quiet intensity. Latin manuscripts, Greek fragments, Arabic treatises. The language was deliberately obscure, the symbols layered and encrypted. For centuries, the alchemists had hidden their spiritual work behind chemical metaphors to protect themselves from persecution by the church. They spoke of the marriage of sun and moon, the death of the king, the birth of the divine child. All of these were symbols Jung had already encountered in his patients' dreams and in his own visions. Now he understood alchemy was the missing historical bridge, the forgotten ancestor of depth psychology. Where the ancient Gnostics had been crushed by orthodox religion, the alchemists had survived by hiding their sacred knowledge inside furnaces and flasks. One image seized Jung's imagination above all others: the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail. The alchemists said this serpent represented prima materia, the original substance that contained everything necessary for transformation. Jung recognized it instantly. This was the unconscious itself. It consumed and renewed itself endlessly. It destroyed and regenerated in one continuous circle. The work of individuation was learning how to relate to this force without being swallowed by it. During these years, Emma Jung joined him in the study. She turned her attention to the Grail legends, uncovering yet another hidden Western tradition of transformation. Together, husband and wife moved through centuries of symbolic language, decoding images left behind by forgotten seekers. Their marriage deepened. They were no longer only partners in life, but companions in exploring the secret history of the Western soul. And as Jung slowly uncovered the lost gold of alchemy, he realized something profound. What the modern world had rejected as superstition was, in truth, the symbolic record of humanity's longest inner journey, the journey toward wholeness. Chapter 10: When the Ancient God Awoke. By 1933, Carl Jung was watching Germany with growing unease. On the surface, the nation still appeared disciplined and orderly, cultured, rational, efficient. But beneath that polished exterior, Jung felt something old and violent beginning to stir. The calm surface was cracking, and from the depths of the collective psyche, an ancient force was rising. Jung gave it a name few dared to speak aloud: Wotan, the storm god of the old Germanic world, the wandering spirit of frenzy, possession, and destruction. The god who seized men, dissolved their individuality, and drove them into ecstasy and ruin. In an essay that would follow him for the rest of his life,
Jung wrote that Wotan had awakened in the German unconscious, not as a myth, but as a psychological reality. The torchlit parades, the mass rallies, the hypnotic speeches that drowned out individual thought. These, Jung said, were Wotan's rituals. Hitler, to Jung, was not merely a political figure. He was a medium, an instrument through which unconscious forces were moving, forces far older than reason or ideology. That same year, 1933, Jung made a decision he would later regret deeply. He accepted the presidency of the General Medical Society for Psychotherapy, an organization now operating under Nazi control. Jung believed, perhaps naively, that from within he could protect his Jewish colleagues. He revised the society's statutes so that Jewish doctors expelled from the German section could continue as individual members of the international body. He preserved letters showing his resistance and his efforts to shield those being pushed out. But history does not remember intentions carefully. Jung's name had become linked to an organization under Nazi authority, and that association would haunt him forever. He was branded by some as a sympathizer. The truth was far more complex and far more painful. Jung despised all forms of totalitarianism. To him, Nazism and communism were twin expressions of the same danger, the drowning of the individual soul beneath mass possession. His entire psychology was devoted to the opposite task, to strengthen the individual against the crushing weight of the collective. During these years, Germans came to Jung secretly. They spoke in whispers. They described neighbors turning on neighbors, children denouncing parents, ordinary people becoming unrecognizable. Jung saw what was happening with terrible clarity. This was shadow projection on a national scale. Everything the German psyche refused to face within itself, hatred, fear, weakness, cruelty, was being projected onto the Jews. And once projected, it was being exterminated. The situation darkened rapidly. Jewish analysts fled to England and America. Jung wrote recommendations, arranged positions, helped however he could.
Yet at the same time, some of his own statements about cultural and psychological differences between peoples were torn from context and twisted to serve political hatred. He had meant only that every culture is shaped by its history. But in that climate of obsession and fury, nuance itself became dangerous. By 1936, Jung felt war approaching long before it arrived. His patients brought him dreams of fire, of cities collapsing, of armies of the dead marching across Europe. To Jung, these were not private nightmares. They were signals rising from the collective unconscious, the psyche of a continent preparing itself for catastrophe. In 1940, Jung resigned from the German society entirely. Soon after, his name appeared on a Nazi blacklist. When France fell, Swiss authorities warned him that he might be kidnapped or assassinated. He was advised to leave Zurich. Jung refused. He was Swiss. He would not abandon his country. He would not abandon his patients. But he understood what was unfolding. The shadow Europe had refused to face for centuries was now loose. All the darkness that civilized nations once projected onto so-called primitives was erupting at the very heart of civilization itself. The most cultivated nation in Europe had become the stage for the most barbaric acts in modern history. And Jung knew the catastrophe was not merely political, it was psychological, a possession, a god awakened from the depths. Chapter 11: India and the Mirror of the Self. In the winter of 1937, Carl Jung set sail for India, He did not go as a pilgrim in search of Eastern wisdom. He went as a psychologist, drawn by a question that had followed him for decades. Could the discoveries he had carved from the Western unconscious survive comparison with a civilization that had explored the inner world for thousands of years? India, he knew, had built systematic paths inward long before Europe had learned to look beyond the surface of things. Jung wanted to test his own psychology against this ancient mirror. The Taj Mahal was his first revelation. At dawn, standing before the great white dome as light rose gently across its marble skin, Jung did not see merely a tomb. He saw a symbol of relationship, a monument to the eternal bond between lover and beloved. Here was something Christianity, in its austerity, had nearly forgotten: that love itself could be a path to the divine. The Taj revealed perfect symmetry, masculine and feminine, balanced in stone. To Jung's eye, it was mandala, the ancient symbol of the self. Islam, he sensed, had preserved an emotional warmth that Protestant Christianity had sacrificed in its pursuit of purity. But India did not speak with a single voice. At the stupa of Sanchi, Jung encountered its opposite. The ancient Buddhist monument rose from the hill like a thought shaped into stone, silent, solitary, severe. This was not the path of union, but the path of renunciation. The Buddha had left wife and child behind. All attachments had been abandoned to reach nirvana. Jung felt the immense power of this discipline, and he felt, just as clearly, its distance from the Western soul. For the Western psyche, relationship was not an obstacle to truth. It was the very ground where meaning took root. Then, in Calcutta, his body dysentery. Struck by for 10 days in a darkened hotel room, floating between dream and waking. And there, in that fragile state between worlds, the most decisive image of the journey arrived. He dreamt he stood on a lonely island off the English coast. Before him lay the Holy Grail, shining with quiet, living light. Voices spoke. This was the vessel meant to heal Europe. When Tony awoke, the meaning was clear. India was not his destiny. Its solutions, ancient, profound, complete in themselves, could not simply be carried west. Europe would have to find its own road back to wholeness. Yet India did not release him easily. The people he met unsettled him. They spoke of good and evil as shifting degrees of the same reality. Maya, illusion, made all opposites provisional. A holy man in Benares told Jung calmly that Christ and Satan were brothers, both sons of God. Jung's Western mind recoiled. Yet he also saw the strange freedom this worldview offered. Indians could accept darkness without the crushing guilt that autonomous Europe. Where the West divided the soul, India embraced its contradictions. At the temples of Khajuraho, carved with thousands of erotic figures, Jung encountered another shock. Every form of human sexuality, every posture, every union, was carved into sacred stone. Here, flesh and spirit were not enemies. In Christianity, Jung saw, the split between body and soul had created centuries of repression and neurosis. Hinduism reunited what the West had torn apart. And yet, nothing was without cost.
Jung sensed that many Indians were less individuated as separate personalities. Identity flowed more easily into tradition and community. The West suffered from too much individuality. The East, sometimes, from too little. The most important moment of the journey, however, came through an act of refusal. Jung deliberately avoided meeting any gurus. He did not visit Ramana Maharshi, though they were in India at the same time. He knew too well the danger. Under the authority of a master, his Western critical consciousness could dissolve, and his entire life's work depended on holding tension between consciousness and the unconscious. Eastern Enlightenment sought to dissolve that tension. Jung's work required preserving it. When he returned to Europe in 1938, he felt no confusion, only confirmation. East and West, he now knew, were compensations for one another. The East had cultivated the inner world and neglected mastery of the outer. The West had conquered matter while nearly losing its soul. Neither alone was whole. True individuation, Jung realized, lies not in fleeing the world for spirit, and not in drowning the soul in material success, but in holding both worlds in living balance.
Chapter 12. When the Sky Opened. Jung, War, and the Edge of Death. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. For the world, it was the beginning of war. For Carl Jung, it was the confirmation of something he had been watching approach for years, not in newspapers, but in dreams. His patients had spoken of fire, of blood, of cities collapsing into ash. The collective unconscious, Jung believed, had already begun to prepare humanity for catastrophe. Now the outer world finally caught up with the inner one. The news struck Jung not only in thought, but in flesh. His chest tightened. Sleep grew restless. Breath sometimes felt shallow, as if the air itself were thick with dread. Switzerland stood surrounded by fascist powers. Then, in 1940, after the fall of France, Jung's name appeared on a Nazi blacklist. The Swiss authorities warned him. German agents moved freely near the borders. Kidnapping, assassination were real possibilities. They urged him to leave Zurich and hide in the mountains. Jung refused. He would remain with his patients, his family, his work. If the darkness came for him, it would find him standing where he belonged. Refugees began arriving across the border. They carried fragments of hell with them, whispers of camps, of deportations, of neighbors vanishing in the night. Listening to them, Jung saw the shadow archetype erupt on a terrifying scale. Everything Europe had refused to acknowledge in itself was now being projected outward and annihilated. The same cultured nation that read Goethe now built extermination camps. Civilization, Jung saw clearly, was only a thin crust over chaos. His son was called into military service. Swiss soldiers guarded the trembling borders. Emma organized the household as if preparing for siege. Blackout curtains, food stores, evacuation plans. And Jung kept working. Patience brought dreams of apocalypse. The boundary between inner collapse and outer ruin dissolved. Personal neurosis seemed almost insignificant against the roar of collective madness. Then, in February 1944, the war reached Jung through an unexpected doorway. He slipped on ice outside his home. His leg shattered. Soon after, his heart failed. For 3 weeks, Jung hovered between life and death, and in that suspended state, consciousness loosened its grip. He found himself 1,000 miles above the Earth. Below, the planet floated in radiant blue light. He could see the Arabian desert glowing gold, the white arc of the Himalayas, the dark ribbon of the Mediterranean stretching toward Gibraltar. Then a black stone temple appeared, suspended in space. Jung knew intuitively that all questions would be answered inside. He was moving toward its entrance when a figure appeared. It was his doctor, yet not as himself. He stood in the form of an ancient Greek healer, like Asclepius reborn. The message was simple. You must return. Your work is not finished. People still need you on Earth. The disappointment was overwhelming.
What he had entered felt more real than ordinary life. Returning meant re-entering the strange theatre of earthly existence. The noise, the conflict, the illusion. When Jung awoke, he wept. For weeks after revival, he could barely tolerate daylight. The world felt like a prison of surfaces. But slowly, something within him began to change. He entered what he would later call the Mysterium Conjunctionis, the sacred marriage of opposites. Day and night, he felt immersed in an inner radiance. The nurse who cared for him later said that his room seemed at times to glow. Jung had touched something beyond argument, beyond proof. The self, he now knew, was more real than the ego. And death was not an ending, only a transition of form. When he returned to his writing, the urgency that once pressed him was gone. In its place stood a quiet certainty. He wrote no longer to convince, but to testify. The war ended in May 1945. Europe lay in ruins. Cities needed rebuilding. But Jung knew something far more difficult lay ahead. Souls. From that cosmic height, he had seen that destruction and creation belong to one vast pattern. The task of the post-war world would not only be to restore streets and bridges, but to confront the shadow that had nearly consumed them all.
Chapter 13. The Harvest of Fire. Aion, Job, and the Awakening of God. After the boundary between life and death had thinned for him, after the sky had opened and closed again, Carl Jung returned to writing with a new kind of freedom. He no longer argued, no longer defended, no longer tried to persuade the world. He simply testified. In 1951, at the age of 76, Jung published Aion. It was a book unlike any he had written before. Across 2,000 years of Christian history, he traced a single hidden image: the self. Christ, Jung argued, had functioned as the great symbol of the self for Western civilization. A model of light, goodness, perfection, and divine order. But something was missing. Christ, as an image, represented only one half of the human totality. Light without darkness, good without evil, perfection without shadow. And what is excluded from divine light does not disappear. It returns. Jung showed how the figure of the Antichrist arose not merely as a theological idea, but as a psychological necessity.
If absolute goodness is projected into heaven, its opposite must erupt from beneath. The Book of Revelation, with its beasts, its wrath, its oceans of blood, was not a prophecy of the future alone. It was Christianity's return of the repressed. The shadow of absolute good, Jung wrote, is absolute evil. He connected this hidden tension to the great astrological symbol of the age of Pisces, two fish swimming in opposite directions. For 2 millennia, the Western soul had been split into irreconcilable opposites: God and devil, spirit and flesh, good and evil. This split had fueled the brilliance of Western civilization, and it had also poisoned it with neurosis. Now, Jung believed, the age of Aquarius was approaching, an age that would no longer tolerate one-sidedness. Humanity would have to integrate its opposites, or be destroyed by them. While writing Aion, Jung felt another pressure rising from deeper within. For decades, one image had never left him: his childhood vision of God defiling the Cathedral of Basel. The problem of divine darkness. In 1952, at 77, Jung wrote Answer to Job. Not slowly, not cautiously, but in a single burst of inner fire. He later said he wrote it as if taking dictation from the unconscious. The book detonated like a bomb. Jung read the ancient story of Job not as theology, but as psychology. God, he argued, appears there not as a perfect moral being, but as an unconscious force. Yahweh permits Job's destruction to win a wager with Satan. He demands worship while inflicting suffering. He behaves not like a just father, but like a tyrant. And Job, the human, does something unthinkable. He maintains his integrity against God. In that moment, Jung said, God is forced toward consciousness. The imbalance is exposed. And so God must become human in Jesus Christ, not merely to save humanity, but to evolve morally himself. Yet the incarnation, Jung argued, remains incomplete. Christ is sinless, and that means he is not fully human. The crucifixion does not redeem the whole of humanity. It is God's attempt to atone for his treatment of Job. The deeper transformation, Jung said, would not come from heaven. It would come from ordinary human beings. Each person who becomes conscious of their own darkness, who faces their own capacity for evil without collapsing into it, participates in the slow transformation of the God image itself. This, Jung believed, was the true meaning of the Holy Spirit, not descending from above, but awakening within human consciousness. The reaction was immediate and violent. Theologians accused Jung of blasphemy, of madness, of inflation. He did not defend himself. He had written what had tormented him since childhood. The problem of evil, Jung insisted, could not be solved by doctrine. It had to be lived, suffered, integrated. These works exhausted him. He was in his late 70s now. His mortality stood close beside him. But he felt finished. The split image of God in the West was beginning to change, not through churches, not through institutions, but through individuals doing the quiet labor of inner truth. Every person who integrated their shadow, who united their opposites, participated,
knowingly or not, in the continuing incarnation. The long journey Jung had begun in solitude, in terror, and in inner fire was now bearing fruit for the world. Chapter 14. The Final Conjunction. Love, Loss, and the Last Light. The 1950s arrived not as a season of rest, but as a season of parting. In March 1953, Toni Wolff died suddenly. For 40 years, she had been far more than a colleague. She was the quiet mirror of Jung's inner life, his collaborator, his intellectual equal, the one who understood parts of him that even Emma could not fully reach. Her thinking deeply shaped his ideas on psychological types. Their conversations had lasted decades, and now, without warning, that voice went silent. Jung fell physically ill for months, not from age, but from rupture. One particular dialogue of his soul had ended forever. Then, only 2 years later, came the deeper blow. In 1955, Emma fell ill. The diagnosis was cancer. For 52 years, she had been the axis of his life. While Jung descended into dreams, visions, and the depths of the unconscious, Emma had carried the visible world, raising 5 children, stabilizing the household, learning his psychology from within until she became an analyst herself. Her profound work on the Grail legend, which would later be published after her death, revealed how deeply she had shared his inner path. On November 27, 1955, Emma died. Jung would later call it the greatest loss of his life. He did not collapse into words. He turned to stone. At Bollingen, beside the lake, he carved tablets with the names of his ancestors, his father's line, his mother's line, reaching back through the centuries. As his hands cut into rock, he reflected on what he called the impersonal karma of the family. Individual lives vanish, but the ancestral river continues to flow. I am only, he felt, a momentary form taken by an eternal process. And yet, in the same year as Emma's death, Jung completed the work that gathered his entire life into a single symbol. Mysterium Conjunctionis, 1955. 700 pages devoted to the ancient secret of union. Through the language of alchemy, Jung revealed how the old masters had projected inner transformation onto chemical operations. Sulfur and mercury, sun and moon, king and queen. When the alchemists spoke of creating the philosopher's stone, they were not chasing physical gold. They were describing the marriage of consciousness and the unconscious. True transformation, Jung wrote, begins not in purity, but in what is rejected. The prima materia, the raw substance of the soul, is found in filth, in shame, in shadow. One must descend before ascending. Wholeness is not perfection, it is inclusion. Light and dark, masculine and feminine, spirit and matter. In his final essays, Jung turned his gaze toward the future of humanity. In The Undiscovered Self, 1957, he warned of a new danger: mass-mindedness, television, advertising, political propaganda. Human beings were dissolving into averages, into crowds, into statistics. The only defense, he said, was self-knowledge. A person who knows their own shadow cannot be easily possessed by demagogues. Even the strange phenomenon of flying saucers caught his attention, not as alien machines, but as symbols. Modern humanity, he believed, having lost its sacred images, was projecting the self onto technology. Glowing discs in the sky, beings from above. These were technological mandalas, the psyche's last desperate attempt to represent wholeness in a world that had forgotten God. By 1960, Jung was 85. His body weakened, but his mind remained luminous. That year, he gave his final interview to the BBC. The question was simple. Do you believe in God? Jung paused. Then he answered quietly, I do not need to believe. I know. This was not faith, he explained, but direct experience. He had encountered the objective reality of the psyche, a reality that existed beyond personal opinion. Whether one called it God, the self, or the collective unconscious, the reality remained the same. And so, at the edge of life, having walked through shadow, love, loss, vision, war, death, and rebirth, Carl Jung stood not as a prophet, but as a witness. Chapter 15. Return to the root, when the flower becomes the seed. 1960. Carl Jung had a dream that felt different from all the others. He was standing in a vast public space, speaking to a great multitude, and they understood him. For decades, his ideas had lived mostly in the quiet margins of academic journals and dense psychological texts. But this dream carried another message. The time for the underground work was ending. The roots were ready to send their meaning into the open air. Not long after, a BBC producer named John Freeman approached him with a proposal to write a book for ordinary people, a book that would explain the reality of the psyche in clear human language. At first, Jung refused. Then the dream returned, more insistent. This time, he listened. The project became Man and His Symbols. It would be Jung's final gift to the world, a bridge between the hidden depths and everyday life. He chose his collaborators carefully, each one a person who had lived his ideas, not merely studied them. As the year 1961 unfolded, his body weakened, but his mind remained precise. He knew this book was his testament. 10 tenths before his death, Jung finished his final chapter. Even the timing felt orchestrated by the same mysterious intelligence he had studied for 60 years. In those final weeks, the dreams returned, not dark and conflicted as in his earlier life, but radiant. He dreamed of a great round stone carved with words about wholeness and unity. Then he dreamed of trees whose roots were woven of golden threads, rising from the earth and wrapping him in light. For years, Jung had compared human life to a plant that blossoms for one season, while its rhizome, the hidden root, remains below, preserving the pattern of life. And now, he felt himself returning to that root. On June 6, 1961, at his home in Küsnacht, Carl Gustav Jung died peacefully. His visible flowering had ended, but the pattern beneath it had not. What happened next surprised nearly everyone, even those closest to him. Instead of fading into academic history, Jung's ideas began spreading through culture like water finding its own level. Joseph Campbell translated Jung's insights into the language of myth and story. The hero with 1,000 faces revealed that across every culture, the same archetypal journey repeated itself. A hero leaves the familiar world, descends into darkness, finds a hidden treasure, and returns to heal the community. That map of inner transformation would later shape Star Wars, bringing Jungian psychology to millions without them even knowing his name. Therapists, too, discovered that Jung had mapped territories Freud never entered. Where Freud explained suffering through personal history, Jung offered something larger: meaning, purpose, spiritual development. Even Alcoholics Anonymous unknowingly built a transformation process rooted in Jung's insights: surrender to a higher power, confession of the shadow, atonement, rebirth.
It was individuation in disguise. In the 1960s, as social revolutions unfolded, Jung became the hidden architect of an inner revolution. The counterculture found in him what neither behaviorism nor institutional authority could offer: a psychology that honored direct experience. At places like Esalen, the human potential movement grew directly from Jung's belief that each person carries vast, untapped energies waiting for realization. Women, especially, found in Jung a new language for their inner power. Through the anima and animus, he gave both men and women permission to reclaim the parts of themselves their culture had suppressed. Later, Marion Woodman would reveal how unlived life becomes illness in the body. Clarissa Pinkola Estes would decode ancient fairy tales as maps of feminine instinct in Women Who Run with the Wolves, reaching millions who had never heard Jung's name, yet recognized themselves in his patterns. Even the hard sciences began echoing what Jung had discovered through introspection. His collaborator, the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, showed that quantum reality behaved less like a mechanical clock and more like Jung's idea of synchronicity. Mind and matter appeared to move together. Neuroscience would later discover that mythic symbols activate ancient structures in the brain, suggesting that archetypes may be woven into our biology itself. But perhaps Jung's greatest legacy was how the world began to understand evil. Before Jung, evil was either sin to be punished or illness to be cured. Jung revealed something deeper. Evil is often shadow, the rejected parts of ourselves that we project onto others. If enemies carry our shadows, then hatred can be dissolved by reclaiming what we disown. In a world armed with weapons capable of destroying itself, Jung's insight became not merely psychological, but essential for survival. Today, Jung's language lives so fully in daily speech that its origins are often forgotten. We speak of complexes, introverts and extroverts, personas and shadows. The Myers-Briggs type indicator, rooted in his theory of types, helps millions understand that different does not mean defective. Dream work, active imagination, sand play therapy, the belief that symptoms carry meaning, that breakdown can be breakthrough, that the second half of life has different spiritual tasks than the first. All of this came from Jung. The rhizome he returned to in death continues to send new shoots into the world, into ecology, artificial intelligence, religion, art, therapy, and culture. Each generation finds in Jung what it most needs for its own crisis. His essential message remains unchanged. The psyche is real. It has purpose beyond personal pleasure, and a conscious relationship with it is the great work of human life. Jung did not found a dogma. He did not demand belief. He opened a door and simply said, "Look for yourself." Millions have looked, and in their own depths,
they continue to find what Jung once found in his, the shining center in darkness, the pool of life that never dries. And as humanity continues its long and uncertain journey toward consciousness, that hidden root keeps feeding the light. If this story touched something inside you, if Jung's journey helped you see your own a little more clearly, then you are already part of this quiet community of seekers. You're welcome to subscribe, not for notifications, but as a simple way of walking a little further together. And if a thought, a dream, or a question arose while listening, leave it in the comments. Sometimes the unconscious speaks best when we listen to each other. Good night.